All right, now what I'm going to do is walk you through looking at Web Soil Survey and looking at our soil concerns and our practices to kind of give you a better idea of how to use Web Soil Survey in your everyday use. So, the first thing you're going to do when you're looking at your practice is you're going to want to go to Web Soil Survey. And once you get there, you're going to go ahead and put in your latitude or longitude or your address for the site. So for this, I have that latitude and longitude. I'm going to copy and paste that in there. And I'm going to put view. And that's going to take me to the site that I have. And what it's going to do is it's going to generate a little orange circle in either at the address or the latitude or longitude of where you have told it to go to. Next thing I want to do is I want to draw an area of interest. I always do the area of interest larger than the area of my proposed practice. And that's so that I have a better idea of what soils are being mapped in the area in case the area that I'm looking at is not mapped correctly and it's actually an adjacent soil in my area instead of what it's saying is there. Once you have that area of interest, it's going to generate this blue box with lines in it. And that's going to show me my area of interest for my practice. Now, for this site, what I'm looking at is this farmer is wanting to put in a feed pad somewhere down here in this lower field. Generally, he's wanting to look in this area. All right. So, since I know it's a feed pad, the next thing I want to do is before I go any further with our Web Soil survey is I want to cross reference our table. And so when we go over to our table for soil practices, I'm going to go down to feed pad and I'm going to look at what are the things that I need to look at for feed pad. I need to know the depth of bedrock. I need to know drainage class. I need to know slope. I need to look at soil reaction or pH. I need to be looking at flooding or ponding. I need to be looking at hydric soils. I need to look at the depth to water table and I need to look at corrosivity. One other thing that I like to look at for a lot of our practices is I want to look at our linear extensibility as well. That's not listed on here under NRCS standards, but linear extensibility is going to tell me whether or not I have clays in the soil that are going to expand. And those are really key. If we're getting into a linear extensibility issues, that's usually going to be a thing where you're wanting to call a soil scientist and you're going to want to let probably the division engineer handle that site because it's a lot more planning to deal with those types of clay soils. All right. So let's go back to our Web Soil survey. And now that we have our area of interest, we know what the concerns are. Maybe we wrote those down. We can always reference back to the table. We're going to go to soil map up here under this tab. And that's going to generate our soil map in the area of interest that we told it to look at. All right. I'm going to drop down our map unit legend. All right. So I know that he wants to put our put our soil for our soil map unit, we know that our feed pad is going to be in this S and D. So we're going to look S and D. We're going to go over to our table. We know that S and D is a Chinook loam. Um, we know that it also has a 15 to 30% slope. We also know there's another Chinook loam here that's less steep. That is an SNC that's coming down here. So what I want to do is I want to look and see what this tells me about our soils. So we can already, by clicking on this, we're going to get some information I already need about the heavy use area or feed pad from this. So when I look at this Chinook loam, I see 15 to 30% slopes. So instantly, the first thing I want to do is I want to start making some notes, either if I've already been out to the site to cross-reference with what I already know about the site, or if I'm planning on going to the site in the future to be aware of so that I can check to make sure these soils are mapped correctly. So the first thing we look at is the slopes. I have already been to the site, so I know that the slopes at this specific spot are not 15 to 30% slopes. That is way steeper than what this area is. A 15 to 30% slope would be very difficult for us to put the feed pad on. It would take a lot more planning, engineering for it to be that steep to try to get some sort of feed pad structure on. Um, but I know that's not correct. That doesn't mean necessarily that the soil mapping is fully off. And very maybe that this is a less steep slope. but that doesn't mean that it's not acidic loam. And so one thing I would look for is there a less steep version of the soil? And there is. And so that may be what I want to look at more so for this site, since I already know it's less steep. Um, so this one, it's probably less than 8 to 15% slopes out there. Again, it's very flat, so I would assume that it would be more of um, closer to 0 to 3% slopes. But what I want to do is I want to cross reference to make sure. So what that tells me is slope is not going to be an issue for this. So that's one thing I would be looking for is I know from site visit slope is not an issue. What I don't know is the class is well drained unless I've already dug a pit out there or done some sort of sample. Um, I don't know about frequency of ponding. Some of these other things that I'm just not aware of. That's the things I'm going to cross check when I go out there and look. So looking at this, we're going to look at some of the things that we know are going to be problems or could be problems. So checking the soil, if I want to check, I want to check to make sure my typical profile is correct. So if I go out there and I look at that spot for my feed pad, I want to see if it has an AP horizon of 0 to 9 inches that are a loam, that changes over to a BT horizon that's a loam, and then a BT2 horizon that's a cobbly loam. These numbers can be off a little bit, but if it's looking like I have a loamy topsoil with a loam subsurface soil that changes to a cobbly loam, then that's going to make me feel pretty confident that this is mapped as a Chinook loam. So if I did go out there and I verified that this typical profile is what I'm seeing, then I could probably pretty confidently look at the rest of these properties and qualities to make my plan off for my feed pad. So for this, we know that there is no depth to restrictive feature that is less than 80 inches. So that means I don't have to worry about that. I know that its drainage class is well drained, so I'm not going to have to worry about our drainage class problems. This isn't flooded or ponded very often, so I don't have to worry about that. And I also don't have to worry about shallow water table. So that's some of the things on our soil concern sheet that we can check off as not being an issue. All right. So now let's look at some of the other things that could be issues. So let's go over to our suitabilities and limitations for use. So looking at this, suitabilities and limitations for use usually take some of the soil properties and qualities and they kind of quantitatively put them together to get some more information. So for like a feed pad, one thing that you may want to look at is corrosion of concrete and look at the rating to see what's an issue. And that's going to tell us a little bit about our pH issues. For this, we can see that this has a pretty high rating. So these soils are probably going to be somewhat acidic and will cause the concrete to weaken over time. So that may be something you want to call soil scientists to look at, or just let the engineer know that this is probably going to be somewhat corrosive over time. For a feed pad, this may not be as much of an issue because we're not putting any structure on top of the feed pad. But if we were putting like some sort of building, then that may be more of an issue because we don't want that to be weakening that concrete, and we may want to plan ahead for that. If I saw this would be something I would reach out to the engineer about and be like, hey, I did my soil information and saying that this has pretty corrosive conditions at the site. So is there something I need to do about that? What type of planning I do this, or is this something I should hand over to you? Um, Moving forward, some other things I would look for are mostly in the soil properties and qualities. And so this is where I'm going to find all the information that is listed on that soil concern chart. So if we look at our soil physical properties, one big thing that I want to look at for almost every site is linear extensibility. So if I open linear extensibility and I look at my view rating, it's going to pop me down here and tell me, well, how much of the soil do you want us to look at? Is there a certain depth? And so this will be looking at what are the depths of soils that you're going to be looking for. I'm going to look at just all layers for now. And you can put anything. You can put 0 to 20 inches, 0 to 50 inches, just to get an idea. I know this soil is in Watauga County, and there's not a lot of soils in Watauga County that have linear extensibility issues, but it's always good to check. The rating for this is very low. Again, if the rating was getting very high, if I'm getting, way high percentages of our linear extensibility, then that's going to be a huge red flag. I would call my soil scientists to have them look at it and make sure that they're verifying these soils are expansive clays at that point. And I would also want my engineer to be aware after the soil scientist is verified. This is probably where we hand it over to the division engineer to do any of the planning at the sites, especially if we don't have another site for them to look for, because we have to plan around those clays expanding. The way this looks is it does look at a radiant percentage, and this is how much expansion you have. So if you're getting, probably even anywhere higher than these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5%, the higher this number is, I really get really worried. If I'm seeing really high numbers in this, I would definitely call somebody. But looking at these like ratings here, that's not a concern. Other things we're going to look at for this, we're going to go and look at our soil qualities and features, depth to bedrock. And again, we've kind of already saw this, but this is going to tell us again, what are the depth of bedrock things we're going to have? Greater than 200 centimeters. No worries there. Restrictive layers. So this guy is a double check of the things you looked at before. Greater than 200 centimeters. Nothing to worry about there. Again, you can kind of check the other ones to see is there anything I need to work out. Flooding and ponding, we already found out there wasn't a problem there, but if you were looking for that individually, depth to water table, all that's underwater features. We didn't have a problem with that we saw. Soil reaction to pHs under soil health properties, so we could look at that. And again, this is going to be related to that corrosivity that we were looking for. And this is going to tell me a little bit more about what our pH is. These are kind of typical numbers for mountain soils. Again, around a 4.8 to 5. We tend to have more acidic soils, so that's not anything that I would be very concerned about. Again, looking at that corrosivity, that's probably where you're going to be more concerned about. So now we've kind of looked at a lot of the things that we had as problems. And I'm not looking at anything that's a huge concern. The biggest concern we had was slope, but we have went out and verified that the slope for this site is less than that, so we're not going to have to worry about slope or anything else. We knew that our depth is fine. Again, we're going to double check our table. Depth to bedrock wasn't an issue. Drainage class, not an issue. Slope, not an issue. Soil reaction pH, possibly an issue. May want to consult our soil scientist on that to make sure. We didn't see flooding or ponding. We don't have hydric soils as a problem. We didn't have a depth to water table problem. And again, corrosivity, we want to talk to our soil scientist to see if that's an issue, or our division engineer when we're planning this. Otherwise, all of the things for a feed pad we've knocked out. The thing that I want to do now is I want to take the information that I have. I want to go out to the site and I want to field verify that those soils are matching up. If I go out there and I'm seeing water in my hole, if I'm seeing that the soils aren't matching up, maybe it's clay all the way down. We don't have that. That would be a concern. If I'm seeing anything that's indicating that we have a high water table, if I'm starting to see gray coloring in our soils, that could be indications of water table or reduced soils. That's a big concern for me planning this. And so if I see those things, that's when I want to contact the soil scientist and be like, hey, I went out there. I don't think these soils are matching up correctly. I'm planning a feed pad. Could you come out and look at this to get me an idea of, is this something that we can manage, or is there perhaps another place close by that the soils are better suited, that the landowner would be more comfortable with us putting there? And this may be a better site in general. And that kind of gives you an idea of how you go through these soil practices with Web Soil Survey. Again, you would kind of do the same thing with any of these conservation practices. You're going to be looking at different things. And the key is check the soils on the site and make sure that things are looking and lining up correctly with soil survey. If you have that and it's looking correct, then you're pretty safe. If it is starting to look like they're not matching up, that's when you really want to call a soil scientist to come out there and try to figure out what your soils are looking like.